I hope I'm audible.
Yes, it's audible.
Thank you. So, hello and welcome everyone to this webinar. I am Eddie Valte, a faculty in the Department of English and Communication, Martin Luther Christian University, Shillong. So I'll be the program manager for tonight. Before I begin, I would like to convey to everyone that this webinar, future references. Yes. First of all, I'd like to express my gratitude to everyone who made this program possible, especially the organizers and our distinguished resource persons and the MLCU administrative for the funds that they provide for the success of this webinar. And also, our special thanks also goes to the Bible Zoomers who willingly lend us this Zoom platform. Thank you for that. So this webinar titled Magic, Discourse, and Society, a critical analysis of Thangou, Liandou, the tale of Thangou and Liandou. This is organized as a collaboration between the Zoo Academia and the Department of English and Communication, MLCU. Before I go on any further, I'd like to give a little introduction about the Zoo Academia, as this is their debut in front of the public. So Zoo Academia, conceptualized in 2020, is a collective of researchers from different interdisciplinary fields. Their objectives includes organizing of academic-oriented seminars, discussions, symposiums, etc., pivoted on Zoo history and society. So that was about the Zoo Academia in short. And if you would like to know more about them, you can even contact them through the. There will be contact information given in the poster. You will be able to see it there. Yes. So now it is my privilege to introduce to you our esteemed host and resource persons. As you might have seen in the flyers that is being circulated, we have with us our first resource person, who is also our host for tonight, Dr. Chingbiakmawi. Manipur University. She has done her MPhil and PhD in MZU. And we are honored to have her as the host and a resource person for our webinar tonight. Now, another esteemed resource person we have tonight is Ma'am Siamlianvung Hangzo, who is currently an associate professor in Shivaji University under the University of Delhi. Put her up in the slide. Yes. So she has done her MPhil from Annamalai University and currently pursuing her PhD in the University of Delhi. So it is our privilege to welcome them, our host and resource person. I would like to have a brief highlight of the program for tonight. The webinar is more of a discussion, although there will be presentations from the resource person. But of course, the host will guide us through the program, and it is at her discretion to change anything in the program. And while the discussion is going on, there could be questions from the participants. And for that, what you can do is any questions or comments, you can type them in the question and answer box. If you see, it might be at the bottom of your screen, or it might be written chat box. Okay, so you can type in there, and this will be reviewed during the question hour. Okay, after the discussions and the presentation. So the host and I will be looking after the question raised and bring it forward to be answered or discussed uh, to our resource person. And another important thing is that there will also be a feedback form given in the chat box by the end of the program. And I request everyone to please fill it up and give us your valuable feedback. You will be given e-certificates which will be sent to you through the email you'll be providing in the feedback form. Okay. So I hope we are clear with everything here. So with that, now I hand over the time to our resource person, Dr. Chingbiakmawi. She will be presenting to us for the first part and will be taking up as the host for the discussion. Okay, in the later part. So please, ma'am, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much to be here in this platform together with you all. It was a proud moment for me when I received invitation from Zoe Academia, because from the time I was doing research on folkloristic study, I felt the need for all of us, irrespective of our academic or profession or whatever background we have, we must educate ourselves more on us, meaning our identity, our culture, our history, our society, politics, economy, religion, including our principles and values. And for this, folklore cannot be neglected because it is, the main source from which we get unadulterated materials. And when I think of these things, I always remember what Julian Jacobs writes in the book, The Nagas. Let me quote here. Many young Naga people feel today about their cultural past. Everybody tells them not to lose their Naga culture, to connect to the past. But if they ask, so what is our culture? How was our past? They will be told a strongly Christianized story by their parents and grandparents. But the young people, especially the educated ones, know very well that this is not true. This evening, I want to emphasize on the significance of folklore. So I'll read a paper on why folklore matters. Okay, let me start my paper. Okay. Folklore, according to Liandhou, this is by autobiographical ethnography. That is, it is the people's own description of themselves. Folklore covers traditional art, literature, knowledge, and practice that are disseminated largely through oral communication and behavioral example. It is a known fact that folklore is the backbone of literature and a mirror of culture. The history of folklore studies reveals that folklorists in many different countries have often been inspired by the desire to preserve the national heritage. The Grimm's brothers, for example, at the beginning of the 19th century, imbued with nationalism and romanticism, and armed with the fashionable methodology of historical reconstruction, collected folk tales and legends with the hope of rescuing something truly German, that is, something Teutonic. Likewise, folklorists, as the pioneering students of culture, were initially interested in folklore because they correctly hypothesized that documenting and studying it had the potential to provide insights into the historical roots, cultural distinctiveness, and national character of individual nations. The different genres of folklore, including folk tales, are the embodiment of cultural heritage left by the forefathers. Folklore, as a mirror of culture, reveals differences and similarities in ways of thinking, and therefore can serve as a tool for teaching cultural understanding. For cultures like ours, which had no written records of the past until recently, due to the absence of script, it is essential to take our folklore into account if we are determined to study our historical and cultural past. We have a rich trove of folk tales, myths, legends, and songs that reflect our traditional social structure, belief systems, morals, and values. We were believed to have migrated to our present settlement through a long trail spanning several centuries. It is difficult to trace our early history and culture due to our semi-nomadic life, the consequent absence of a settled form of cultural and social establishment, and the lack of interaction with other cultures also prevented the creation of permanent markers or monuments, which led to the absence of historical accounts and records documenting our history, origin, culture, and migratory trail to our present and permanent land. With the passage of time during our migration, our people, however, eventually developed a well-organized structure of village administration and polity with the village chief as the administrative head. Each village was ruled by its own chief. The smallest unit in the village was a household with the father as the head of the family, and a woman held no authority in the family as well as in the society. Our traditional society can be considered as anthropocentric. Our indigenous faith held a very important place in our forefathers' lives as it dictated the way they lived. Every aspect of their lives were linked to their beliefs and values in one way or the other. The ultimate reward for the man was to attain a place in paradise in the afterlife where they would no longer have to walk, but where there would always be an abundance of food, grain, and meat. All these aspects of our past social and cultural life are reflected in our folklore. However, our conversion to Christianity in the late 19th century brought about transformation in the culture and society as never before. It is remarkable to note that for a people who had hitherto lived in near complete isolation from the influence of other cultures, the arrival of Christianity brought about profound changes in the cultural makeup to such an extent that many negative aspects of the old and traditional way of life, such as superstition and slavery, were done away with to embrace the new Christian faith. The result was that within the span of a century, the entire Zhou population had converted to Christianity. However, this new transformation was not without unwanted elements. The missionaries introduced education since British administration granted them the authority to do so upon noticing their efficiency in spreading education to our people. With education and the advent of British administration, the society was inevitably geared towards modernization and the rapid transformations that such change entails. Since the old ways of life were gradually abandoned in order to embrace the new faith and worldview, those elements among the old ways of thinking and the traditional customs and moral codes upheld by our people, but which went against the dictates of the new faith, were abandoned. In the traditional Zhou society, the social structure, their indigenous faith, and their village community were closely interlinked and played a very important role in their lives, and it can be said that their entire worldview was structured by this. Upon closer look, it could be seen that the culture, customs, and belief system of the Zhou were geared towards fostering better relations amongst the members of the village community and to ensure their collective survival in a land and environment that pose a constant threat to their survival in various forms. The available accounts of a history were obtained principally by means of conjectures and speculations by British administrators, historians, and scholars based on personal interviews, study of extant tradition and cultural practices that were still in practice as witnessed by them. As a result, the study of our oral tradition and our folkloristic items become all the more important in order to form a definition of the cultural history of our people. The acquirement of Romanized script from the white missionaries was indeed a hallmark in our history. It was during this period that our culture underwent extensive changes. It was a period when we adopted the new culture or the white man's culture and rejected the old culture, which was our own. With the radical changes that came about in the 20th century due to modernization, folklore became more and more neglected. These changes were in a way natural and inevitable for smaller cultures that inevitably get transformed by bigger culture. At the same time, it also sowed the seed of abhorrence towards the old system, which eventually is detrimental for those of us who attempt to comprehend and study our true cultural identity. The converted Zhou society thus replace their folk tales with biblical stories. Children are taught Shakespeare, Milton, etc. as great literature in school, and the love story of Romeo and Juliet is appreciated much more than Chingbiakmawi. Some years back, The Great Penglam, the story of the legendary hero and trickster, was filmed in Churachandpur district of Manipur, but proved a failure due to a harsh criticism from society that saw it as too vulgar and not appropriate for children, mainly due to the depiction of sexuality in the tales. I am not saying here that we must stop telling the younger generation about others. We can definitely continue, but we should also tell them those which are our own, so that we as a culture appreciate things which are ours, which in turn uplift our worth in our cultural consciousness. And basically what I am saying is we are not subordinate to others. That we do not have a written record of our past does not mean that we have no history, but we must find a way to relearn, rewrite, and reconstruct our past, which might need a lot of deconstruction and unlearning. The last time I checked, some undergraduate students of their familiarity with their folk tales, they know Thanghou Liandou, they know Mao Zhuang, they know Chingbiakmawi and other folk tales. But the moment I asked them to narrate the tales, they were unable to do. I asked them who told them the tales and where. They were not able to give me a name or a place, but they claimed that they just knew those tales as young children. No, as a matter of fact, our folk artifacts have gradually become irrelevant and lost some value in modern society. And this in turn suggests that a very important component in defining cultural identity is missed out. To end my paper, I'll quote the Greek historian Herodotus. If one were to offer men to choose out all the customs in the world, such as seemed to them the best, they would examine the whole number and end by preferring their own. So convinced are they that their own usages surpass those of all others. Okay, this is my paper, but before we give time to our resource person, I would like to give a brief, give the gist of the selected tale, Thanghou Liando. Thanghou Liando, it is a folktale common to all the Zhou people. Liandou in Le Tuaisia la in Mizo, Liandou Le Tuaisia in Mar, Liandou Le Anaupa in Thado, and so on and so forth. And if you look at the position of the name, these two names in the tale, you will know the difference. And because our today's tales, the selected tale is Thanghou Liando, and in all the tales that I have mentioned, it's Liandou first, and then the little brother in the second. And originally being an oral tale, there are different variations or versions of this tale. When we try to study these tales, we get more variations than we hope for. These variations are interesting, and actually one can do further studies on whether they are due to the differences in dialects or tribe in modern days or the geographical location of the people or folk. This folktale focuses on the sad fate of two brothers, Liandou and Thanghu, who as young children were abandoned by their mother after the death of their father. This folktale is reflective of the traditional social structure of the folk, as well as the urges and desires of the less privileged, such as orphans, widows, women who belong to the fringes of the society. Basically, the tale is about the strong bond between two orphan brothers and the treatment meted out to them by our classless egalitarian society. All in all, it is an interesting tale encompassing a wide area of our traditional life. But instead of much further ado, of course, we'll discuss further on all these as well as other aspects after the presentation. And I want to remind all the participants that your active participation in the discussion is very much anticipated and will be very much welcomed. Now I hand over the time to our resource person, Ms. Siamlianvung, please.
Good evening. Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, sure.
So first of all, I really want to extend my gratitude to Zo Academia and the Department of English of Martin Luther Christian University for enabling such a platform where I think for the first time we are discussing, in an academic ambience, about the literature of the Zo community. There has been a lot of academic research and deliberations on the idea of zoneness, but they have always been restricted to the social sciences largely. And if I'm not mistaken, I think this is the first time that something is being done exclusively for literature. And I'm also very grateful for inviting me to be here, although I am actually not very equipped as yet to be sharing a paper with you. Nevertheless, I agreed to participate in this seminar because this is an area which I'm working on in my PhD right now. Unlike my predecessor, I will not be getting too much into the theoretical components of folk literature, because I believe, just looking at the names on the participant list, a large number of you are perhaps not from the academic background, not from academia per se. And therefore, what I have strategized is that I will look at this paper as if I'm taking a class, right? As if I'm taking a class, and therefore, and also keeping in mind that some of you may not be familiar with the text, I will be summarizing the text, and as I summarize the text, I will be also making these intermittent digressions to explain my positionality regarding this particular topic. Okay. So let us start. I hope I do not bore you, but nevertheless, it has to be done. So let's get it done with. So before I begin, the text that I have been using, the text that I have used here has been translated by me, and I have used the Dr. G. Zangachin's text, Dr. G. Zangachin's version of Tango and Liando, which he had published in his book Paite Tanchin. Another thing is that this is going to be the Paite version of Thanghou and Liando, and as my previous speaker has already mentioned, there are multiple variations of the same text with slight differences, but nevertheless the story remains the same. Okay, so I will start here. So regarding the topic that we have in hand, we are talking of magic, we are talking of discourse, we're talking of we're talking of magic, we're talking of discourse, we're talking of society as reflected in this particular folktale that we are going to be analyzing this evening. You will find that I will have a very minimal usage of the word magic, because I will be replacing it with supernatural, because I feel that magic comes under the ambit of supernatural also. So let me begin my paper here. So, as early as 1859, Alexander Bain, in his book The Emotions and the Will, hypothesizes that it is natural for human beings to believe in everything that they witness around them without demanding irrefutable evidence. If something exists, it must necessarily be also true. Now, this rather childlike naivety can be described as a primordial innocence which demands the acceptance of unexplainable phenomenon, thereby making it credible and plausible. Paitya folklore, both the tales and its songs, bear testimony to the existence of these mystical entities and how they often determine the outcome of a human being's life. The appeasement of these evil spirits was deemed necessary to prevent the loss of life, property, ensure a good harvest, and the general health of the people, and also the safe passage into the afterlife. This binary classification of transcendental entities as good and evil is very common to most religions, whether they are indigenous or whether they are organizationally structured. Now, in his seminal essay of 1916, Arthur J. Todd, in the essay that is The Primitive Notions of Self, Arthur J. Todd explains how the spiritual belief of, quote, primitive societies could not be simplistically deemed as animism. Now, this is a term that has been often used by various writers on Paitya folklore, where they simply abrogate the pre-evangelical religion of the community as animism. Now, my postulation here is that based on Arthur J. Todd's hypothesis, that this opinion that the transubstantiation of a man's spiritual faith into images of nature must rather be defined as, quote, dynamism, energism, mantoism, or mysticism, quote, closed. It is this fluidity in transition that defies a fixed and rigid categorization of occurrences as either natural or paranormal. Now, Todd elaborates this further by drawing upon Lévi-Breuil's explanation of a primitive mentality and the conclusion that savages did not implement logical discrimination to differentiate between the subject and the object. He opines that the primitive mind advances beyond a mere representation of the object for his understanding. Rather, he takes control over the object and is dominated by it. This phenomenon is accompanied by a simultaneous participation with the represented object at both the temporal and spiritual planes of existence. In a sense, the primitive tribal lives out what he thinks. Now, this is very important because this idea seems to challenge the physical presence of these mystical, magical entities that we come across, not just in this text, but in folklore as a whole. This particular perspective seems to argues that at times, what is considered or what has been traditionally considered to be magical, supernatural entities are actually the imagination of the primitive man, who does not differentiate between a physical, temporal, entity or something which exists in a spiritual plane. So the argument here that is being placed is that, it is not necessary that these mystical creatures or these mystical occurrences may have actually happened in real time. Okay. To further this argument, you have G.N. Davy, very, very famous Indian, doyen in tribal studies, in his anthology, Painted Words, an anthology of tribal literature. He states that the tribal imagination, quote, the tribal imagination to a large extent is dreamlike and hallucinatory. It admits fusion between various planes of existence and levels of time in a natural way. He believes that the image-making faculty, which is intrinsic to the human mind, is more enhanced in a tribal storyteller who reproduces their narratives on the basis of their, quote, racial and sensory memory. Now, Paite orality is replete with this representation of the mystical sublime. The appearance of demons, spirits, shapeshifters in daily lives is so commonplace and believable for an early tribal that echoes of this phenomenon is but naturally evident in our folk tales. Their minds believe in ghosts and spirits, not because they fear them, but because they know it exists. For them, their interaction with the supernatural and the occult is a perfectly valid and normal experience. The spirit realm is but a natural extension of his identity, an alter ego of the living self. It enjoys a coterminous existence with reality and the perceivable natural world. Having said this, one cannot deny that although there is an abundance of the mystical in Paite folklore, one must also pay attention to the fact that there is an equal emphasis on recounting the real from a basic function of reporting daily events, humdrum domestic issues with no attempt to moralize or pass judgment. Now, this ambivalence holds true for both the supernatural and the real world, which is encountered by this early pre-evangelistic Paite community. Now, this is also partly the reason why characters from folklore appear to be flat or one-dimensional. Characters do not undergo inner and complex deliberations. Rather, they become subjects to the trials and tribulations that life and fate throws at them. To attribute this monochromatic perspective to their primordial minds would be grossly unfair, for in the mind of the tribal, the real and the unreal are but representations of the same existence. Now, to exemplify my argument, let us now go on to examine the text at hand, Tango and Liando, which simply translates as Thangou and Liando. As I said, I will be talking about the Valte version of Tango and Liando, and keeping in mind, as I said, that there are some of us who are not familiar with the text, I will be summarizing it, and intermittently I will be digressing to analyze certain episodes or scenes which I feel are pertinent to our topic for today. So the plot is episodic in its narrative style and can be read as a rudimental Bildungsroman. It is the poignant tale of two brothers from Chingbiakmawi who were abandoned by their mother Liandou following the early death of their father. So life is harsh for the boys. Often after performing arduous domestic tasks, the brothers are left unfed and they're also very terrified. Their appeal for food or a comforting hug is met with a punishment by being covered with a large basket for many hours as their mother saunters off, deaf to the cries of her sons. Often the neighbors come to their rescue, releasing the boys from their entrapment and also providing them with leftover food and rags to cover their frail bodies. Now, early Paite customs dictated that a widow, especially with sons, would more often than not remain in her husband's home and take care of her children. So thematically, the tale opens with a scrutiny of the mother figure and the extent of Liandou's deviancy by refusing to abide by the normative behavior prescribed for a woman, especially a widow. So Liandou's immediate goal is to get rid of her maternal responsibility and seek a new husband. Her abandonment of the children is not a hasty decision. One day, she finally contrives a plan to engage her sons in an impossible task, during which she decides to leave them for good. Accordingly, she instructs them to fill water in their gourd bottles from the nearby rivulet. She deliberately makes a hole in Liandou's bottle, and the brothers find themselves unable to return home as their bottles can never be filled. The fear of their mother's wrath on discovering an unfilled bottle keeps the brothers repeating their futile action. Now, a bird hovering above them whispers into their ears that their mother has departed to find a husband. Exasperated, Thanghou cries out. Whether their mother has abandoned them or not, his priority here is to fill his younger brother's bottle. With each attempt to fill Liandou's bottle, the day shortened and soon dusk was about to set in. Unable to complete the given task, the brothers return home and call out for their mother. The neighbors rush towards them and break the news that their mother has indeed deserted them. Upon hearing this, the boys with their dog run in search of her. When they manage to reach a mount, they spot their mother in the valley below. They pursue her as fast as their frail little legs could carry them. When they are within an earshot of their mother, they beg her not to leave them. Liandou looks back and shouts that if Liandou, her elder son, truly loves her, then he should push his younger brother and the dog into the ravine and accompany her. Upon hearing this, Liandou declares that he loves his brother and the dog more than her. Now, Liandou's strange order to Thanghou can be attributed to two reasons. Now, the first is that Paite inheritance law follows the rule of primogeniture, which means the eldest son will inherit the father's property. And Liandou's, and the practice, so two things are there in the Paite customary law. Number one is that it follows the rule of primogeniture, which is the eldest son will inherit. Secondly, there is also the practice of Intuan, which is what happens when the younger brothers establish their own dwellings when they marry. Now, Liandou's foresight realizes that in her old age, it is Thanghou who will be duty-bound to take care of her. Now, another practical reason is the difficulty of feeding two mouths, which also reduces her chances of remarrying. Now, the refusal of Thanghou to follow his mother's command reveals his maturity despite his young years. It is also hailed as an exemplary principle of brotherhood that the listeners of the tales are instructed to emulate. A modern-day equivalent would be the proverb, blood is thicker than water. The brothers continue pursuing their mother, who kept on making the same demand each time they managed to close the gap between them. Finally, darkness settles in, and exhausted, they seek refuge in their maternal uncle's shed in the fields. Soon, Liandou crosses paths with some miscreants who are about to kill her. She manages to strike a bargain with them. She informs the men of the shed and asks them to take the lives of her son instead. This action once again re-emphasizes her lack of maternal love, which buttresses her portrayal as essentially a wicked woman. Upon reaching the shed, the men begin slashing it with their machetes. A sharp blade strikes the young Liandou's finger, who then asks his brother if he could howl and cry in pain. Thanghou wisely advises him to squeak so as to evade the men, who, on hearing him squeak, now think that the shed is infested with mice and they torch it instead. The brothers manage to escape through the billowing smoke and hide in a bear's den. Now, what follows, in my opinion, is the most poignant scene in this entire tale. When, tired and thirsty from the fumes and smoke, Liandou asks his elder brother for a drop of water. Thanghou offers him a drink of his tears, which his brother declines, saying it is too salty. Shortly after, Liandou cries out again for some water. This time, Thanghou offers him drops of his nasal mucus, which Liandou again declines to partake, as it would be too salty again. Thanghou then offers him a drink of his urine, which his brother refuses to drink. So the regression from the tears to the nasal mucus and finally to the scatological repugnant urine, I feel, mirrors their deplorable condition, which only appears to worsen at each turn. So having experienced a complete family structure, they find themselves fatherless, and then they are now rendered orphaned by their mother's desertion. So his younger brother's unquenched thirst compels him to undertake a short but risky visit to a nearby river to collect some drinking water. He departs after instructing Liandou to be absolutely quiet. Meanwhile, the bear returns to its cave, and a frightened Liandou holds his breath in fear. A strand of the bear's fur tickles Liandou's nose, and he lets out a loud sneeze. The sound takes the bear by surprise, and it loses its balance and falls to its death in the adjacent ravine. Upon his return, Thanghou finds the corpse of the bear and decides to cut it up for its meat. Liandou runs to his uncle to borrow a machete and returns with a blunt one, which proves to be of no use. Once again, he goes and asks for a sharper knife, but upon his uncle's prodding, he also has to disclose about the dead bear. Sensing an opportunity of easily acquiring meat, his uncle begins to praise Liandou and asks him of the whereabouts of the animal. Soon he declares among the villagers of the windfall game. They greedily cut up the animal up and cunningly attempt to leave behind blood-smeared stones as the brothers share. The boys, who are familiar with their uncle's crafty nature, quickly exchange the meat with the stones when he goes to gather some twine to string the meat. The maternal uncle's hostile disposition towards the boys begs some scrutiny. It is a universal truism that children prefer their maternal relatives to their paternal ones. Several Paite Paunak proverbs mention the importance of the maternal uncle in the social structure of the community. Yet we find that far from being concerned about the welfare of the brothers who have been abandoned by his sister, he appears to be antagonistic towards them. This is because he perhaps condones her plans to remarry and similarly views the children as an unnecessary burden. Now, following this episode, there appears to be a case of an interpolation, which is a very common characteristic of folklore, especially in the act of retelling it. The uncle leaves with his meat, and yet the tale narrates how Liandou bursts into tears because of the ill treatment and derision which they are subjected to. Thanghou consoles him and tells him that the innards still remain and that there is a strange clunking sound that emanates from within. As the brothers proceed to open the innards, a bird flying above advises them to do so in a secluded place where they will not be discovered. To their amazement, they find a dakal and a dagbu, which is a gong and a cymbal, within the intestines, and they proceed to play tunes with it. They, however, keep this discovery to themselves. Meanwhile, their uncle, who is making his way home, encounters a bird that tauntingly informs him that he is carrying stones. He replies that they are not stones, but meat. On reaching home, he flings the meat into a pot and ends up shattering the vessel. Infuriated, he sets out for Thanghou and Liandou's home to seek an explanation for their trickery. The tale does not mention what ensues after this incident. Rather, it proceeds to narrate about how the boys who were too young to undertake farming rely upon the leftover scraps of the neighbors. There is a particular mention of how the brothers make do with the leftover bones when they ask for some meat from the neighbors. In the afternoons, while the neighbors are away in the fields, the brothers forage their homes for stale food. In the evenings, the brothers would play on their cymbal and gong and derive some precious moments of lightheartedness and fun that enable them to momentarily overcome their extremely pitiful existence. When the neighbors came to investigate the source of this melody, the brothers quickly would hide their musical instruments and they would begin to play on broken whistles to hoodwink them. So what you find is that, this section, this episode here, talks of, deception, deceit, but there is, there is this kind of a binary which is being created here in differentiating between the nature of forgery, the nature of deceit that is being practiced by the young brothers versus the deceit that is that originates from greed and spite and contempt towards them, and which they experience at the hands of their own uncle and also their neighbors. Now I'll continue with the text. The daily struggle of the brothers to procure food is elevated when their paternal aunt, now please note here, as I said, maternal uncle, and here who is this completely hardened character, which is which goes against the traditional understanding of the more sympathetic maternal relatives. Here now we find that the paternal aunt, who is also called Ni in Paite, when the paternal aunt takes them to her home on the pretext of having a helper for her assistance. Now it is explicitly mentioned that the aunt first seeks permission from her husband before she can execute her plan. Now this attention to detail in the narration testifies to the nature of gender relations, where the agency of a woman was circumscribed within the sphere that has been drawn for her by the male figure, in this case, her husband. However, she pleads the case only for Thanghou, who is given the duty of fetching water for the household. Liandou is still too young to be put to work and is made to hide under the stilts of the house. During the day, Liandou spends his time in the forest as his brother goes about his household chores. At night, he sleeps with the cattle and the pigs. During meals, Thanghou discreetly drops food through the gaps of the floor planks. Liandou scrambles for the morsels as he fends off the animals that are equally hungry like him. The uncle observes that for someone of his size, Thanghou has an extremely large appetite. His aunt scoffs and deflects his attention by remarking that orphans are naturally gluttonous by nature. This routine continues until one day, from beneath the flooring, Liandou's wails call out to his brother that he has dropped the morsel of rice and the pig has eaten it. In what is probably the first instance of genuine concern and loving gesture that the brothers experience, the uncle welcomes Liandou into the family. The young boy is now responsible for husking and drying the grains. Now, one can conclude that in this period, this is a relatively stable period for the brothers, and at a very young age, they learn the valuable lessons of undertaking responsibilities, working together, and are also experiencing familial affection. And the narrative follows a linear progress of time as we now come across the now adolescent brothers who are able to accompany others in clearing the hill tracks to make the June fields. It also appears that they have moved out of their aunt's home and have set up their own establishment. The boys acquire their own plot of farmland, quote unquote, as small as the face of a hen. By mixing millet seeds with mud, they make pellets and release it from the catapults. Miraculously, wherever the pellets land, a millet plant emerges. One day, as they are tilling their land, they unearth some khitang, precious beads. To string these beads, they borrow a string from their aunt, who follows them suspiciously. She discovers the brothers admiring the beads and overhears Liandou asserting that if their aunt was present there now, he would definitely give her the beads. The aunt seizes the opportunity and reveals herself. She prods Liandou about his declaration, but the brothers simply feign ignorance. Now, this scene appears to be a digression thematically, as no conclusion is offered. The beads do not play, the precious beads do not play any role in uplifting them from their humble means. On the contrary, what comes to the forefront is that the brothers appear to be ungrateful towards their aunt, who has all along taken up the responsibility of a mother and a caregiver. So one is compelled to ask, what therefore could be the purpose of including this scene which blemishes the poignancy of the tale? This is probably the first time that you are attributing a negative characteristic to the brothers, where they are being viewed as being ungrateful as well as selfish. Okay. Now, time passes by and the brothers continue their farming. They realize that upon their return, their dwelling is always clean and the food is always prepared. Deciding to investigate this peculiarity, Thanghou one day stays home. Around noon, he witnesses a strange sight. From the Sumtong, which is an old woman, appears, and as she shakes herself, grains fall from her fingertips and the edges of her clothes. With these grains, she proceeds to cook for the brothers. They eventually confront her and she reveals her name as Siamlianvung, and she now begins to live with them. From this juncture begins the meteoric rise in the fortunes of Tango and Liando. Now, this scene is an example of how the primordial religious beliefs and cultural practice of the Valte is reflected in the community's narrative. The Sumtong refers to a spot in the threshold of a dwelling where the sum, which is the wooden rice pounder, was usually placed. In the pre-evangelistic Valte society, the sum was not only a vessel for pounding rice, but it also doubled as an altar where spirits were worshipped. So evidently, the sum was used to invoke blessings for a plentiful harvest and thereby ensuring that the family will never starve. It is therefore significant that Thanghou, this mystical old lady, emerges from this quote, my quote, blessed and holy vessel to ensure prosperity to Thanghou and Liandou. Secondly, Thanghou is an aged woman. So she can be viewed as this allegorical grandmother-like figure who can also be considered as a living repository of experience, wisdom, and knowledge. Thanghou embodies the dual identity of a benevolent spirit and a guiding maternal influence. Under her care, the brothers soon become wealthy in terms of land and cattle, the two parameters of affluence in the early agrarian Valte society. Her divination reveals itself again when the small field of the brothers has to be harvested. Such was the contempt of the villagers that women carrying their babies on their backs remarked that the harvest would be complete before noon. Not surprisingly, the harvesting proves to be a Herculean task. The granary within the house can now no longer accommodate the grains, and yet the harvesting must continue. It is only when the brothers, taking pity on the laboring villagers, implore Liandhou to bring the harvesting to an end that the work is instantaneously over. Now, the story proceeds with a significant leap in time, and we find that Thanghou now seeks a bride. Following the contemporary cultural practices of Mohelna, which is courting the bride, he seeks the hand of Thaitong and immediately fulfills her parents' demands of the bride price, which was negotiable and determined by the social status of the woman. Now, accordingly, Thanghou presents his in-laws to be with kiba, the traditional necklace of precious stones, as many as Thaitong's mother's neck could wear, clothing as much as she could carry on her body, and cattle as much as their compound could hold. The hyperbolic enumerations of the bride price being mentioned here is very important. There is no mention in the narrative of Thaitong's social status, which therefore begs the question whether the exorbitant bride price was determined not by her rank, but a simple human greed that manifests itself at the prospect of having a wealthy son-in-law. Conversely, this extravagance can also be attributed to Thanghou's generosity, or perhaps is an oblique intimation of grandiloquence. Following his marriage, the old Liandhou decides to break her ties with the brothers, although they were most reluctant to do so. She assures them that she will always be available if they ever need her assistance. And for that, all that the brothers need to do is to communicate with her through the sacrifice of a rooster at the Suntong and invoke her appearance. Giving them this advice, she mysteriously vanishes into thin air. Now, the popular and uncontested view is that the practice of animal sacrifice among the Valte originates originates from this advice of Liandhou, and I would also like to draw your attention to the possible reasons for Liandhou's departure. The obvious reason, of course, is that the brothers are young men now. Thanghou has taken a wife who will undertake the domestic chores, and therefore Liandhou's presence is no longer vital. Now, reading beneath this simplistic rationalization, the subtle nuances of a gender dualism emerges. The wise Liandhou is aware that in due course of time, dispute and incompatibility is bound to arise in a household where two women of equal importance live together. Now, this is not a premonition, but a conclusionary fact derived from what must have been a commonplace occurrence. Valte Paunak also reaffirms the inability of women to enjoy a harmonious coexistence under the same roof. Liandhou's departure also enables a juxtapositional study in the nature of the birth mother's abandonment and the withdrawal of the benevolent supernatural entity. While the human mother wickedly abandons her sons at a crucial juncture, the mystical elderly woman is given a reluctant but fond farewell by the brothers after they have been well placed. The younger, foolish, and selfish Nyangdong is also pitted against the older, wiser, and compassionate Liandhou. This comparison certainly has a didactic import of confirming a societal understanding of what constitutes the desirable characteristics of a good woman or mother figure. Now, Thangdou's wife, Thaitong, is presented as a virtuous and gentle woman. The tale mentions only a singular action of hers, which is her generosity and compassion towards her neighbors who now regularly knock on their door for food. The narrative appears to emphasize that their prosperity notwithstanding, the brothers have remained humble and not denied assistance to their neighbors who had always been contentious towards them when they were young. Soon the brothers decide to perform the Ton ritual to mark the gratitude to the divine spirits for their benevolence of wealth and success that has been bestowed on them. Liandhou, in his study of the Valte tribe, describes that the Ton was a grand feast which was laid out by the prosperous families, and meat and customary wine were made available in plenty for all the villagers. The celebration often lasted for at least 3 days. Tango and Liandou's Ton festival, however, lasted for at least a week. The opulence of the feast was reflected in the paths being paved with millet grains and the surplus meat and wine that was easily available even after everyone was satiated. Now, the news of their wealth and largesse spread far and wide. This prompted the reappearance of their mother Liandou, who sets out to meet her sons. On the way, she meets Thanghou, who recognizes her but does not reveal his identity. When she inquires this stranger if he knew of Thangou and Liando, he replies whether she was asking about the two brothers whom their mother had deserted when they were young. He further adds that they are probably long dead and gone. Upon hearing this, she rebukes him and tells him that they are indeed alive and the fame of their prosperity precedes them. This response reaffirms the tale's portrayal of Liandou as a scheming woman who, being true to her nature, has perhaps come to reconcile with her sons, hoping to improve her fortunes. He tells her to follow his dog and cattle to find her way to the brothers' homes, to the brothers' home. He quickly takes a shortcut to reach home and informs his wife of the impending visit of his mother. Now, the brothers momentarily forget their mother's betrayal and welcome her with open arms. She is given luxurious garments and she is fed well. They also offer her the most comfortable bed. However, at night, the sound of the cattle beneath the flooring disturbs her sleep. In anger, she curses her sons and the death of the cattle. The brothers overhear her rant, and in the morning they seek an explanation. Liandou nonchalantly dismisses her evil words. Once again, we find that her response only reaffirms an inimical reading of her character. Realizing that their mother has not changed in all these years, the brothers decide to slaughter a mithun as a farewell meal. With her basket full of eggs, precious beads, and clothes as much as she could carry, Liandou prepares to depart. The brothers instruct her that till the time she crosses the edge of the village, she should not turn and look back. She sets out, but a sense of regret and guilt compels her to turn around and look before she reaches the village's periphery. The sight of the brothers hanging out numerous Puandum and Puansan traditional shawls, which are generally given to signify, achievement, and which is also given as a token of success, outside their home unsettles her. In the grief of realizing what she has lost and her failure as a good mother, she loses consciousness and she dies instantly. The brothers recover her body and give her a respectable burial. Now, I will digress again here. So it is pertinent to note that there is no mention of Liandou's life after she has left her children. Did she actually remarry? If so, did she have children again? If she did have, if so, under what circumstances did she spend her following years? As digressive as these concerns may be, they would have helped the readers understand Liandou better. And as I had at the very premise of my paper, remarked that recounting folk tales, so in the act of retelling folk tales, there is often a propensity to omit either deliberately or because of a simple lapse of memory. Nevertheless, we find that this episodic nature of the tale takes away a large chunk of action which would have helped us understand the characters better, which would have helped us appreciate the text better, and bring about multiple levels of multiple nuances and complexities in the tale. Okay. Yeah. This. Yeah. So there appears to be a deliberate attempt to follow a simplistic binary paradigm in the representation of the female characters in this tale. This argument can further be extended to determine the gender of the original narrator of the tale. The plot, as it has been passed down the years, attests to a male narrator based on the nature of the episodes that have been recollected and handed down. The emphasis that has been placed with reference to cattle, land, the Ton festival, alludes to the tale having been originally narrated from the perspective of a man. Now, this is where it becomes problematic, because folklore theory proposes that it is women who have traditionally been assigned the roles of being folk disseminators, using lullabies or bedtime stories to control and educate children. This tale, like all others in the oeuvre of Paite folk tales, indirectly becomes a medium of enforcing a normative social behavior in its audience. Women thus effectively become endorsers of several dichotomies. Now, the conclusion of the tale is very significant. The curse of the selfish mother does indeed come true, and the fortune of the brothers begin to dwindle. Their grains and cattle begin to diminish. To further add to their woe, Thanghou loses his wife to the torrential waters of the Guntui River while returning from a trip to their uncle's house. It appears that time and fortune had changed the attitude of the uncle towards the brothers. The maid who accompanies them stumbles upon a stone and is about to fall into the water. As Thanghou leans over to help her, he inadvertently lets go of his wife's hands. Taipong slips and drowns in the river. Now, G. Zamsachin's rendition of Tango and Liando ends on this note. Now, at this juncture, a very plausible question that comes to mind is, why didn't the brothers invoke the reappearance of the mystical Tang Lao, who had promised to help them whenever they would need her? Logic dictates that she would have been the first person they would have reached out to when their fortunes begin to recede. Now, I propose that this omission in the sequence of actions confirms what I had remarked earlier on, that in the reiteration of the tale, some scenes may have been deliberately removed, or it can also be a simple case of a memory lapse. A thorough reading of the text reveals that the agency of the supernatural or magic has always been providential, only when the recipient has been obedient in following instructions. The first instance of this benign magical force appears in the form of a bird that informs the brothers of their mother's desertion. Though the tale does not explicitly mention whether it is the same bird which once again advises the brothers to slaughter the innards of the bear in secrecy, for all we know, it might as well have been the same one. If this proposition is accepted, then one can firmly declare that there indeed was a harmonious coexistence of the supernatural with the human world. A talking bird also informs their uncle of the switch of the meat. His refusal to pay heed to the caution results in him destroying his cooking vessels. In the tale of Tango and Liando, the numinous entities have all played the role of a protector to provide and to provide for the young boys when they are at their most vulnerable physically and socially. Likewise, magic has been used to skip the laborious task of sowing to provide a field of saplings, or for that matter, how mysteriously, or was it sheer luck, that the brothers unearthed the precious kiba from their land. The transcendental Tang Lao exercises her powers to clean their house, cook for them, provide them with a bountiful harvest. She takes leave only when she has fulfilled her responsibility of bringing up the boys and securing them a high social status. One can almost construe that the belief in a divine supernatural faith has been responsible for nurturing the orphan brothers. However, once they have been established, there is no reference to magic anymore in the entire text. This absence perhaps indicates that the supernatural agencies do not always entrench themselves in the daily lives of humans. At least in this text, the use of magic is not determined by humans, but occurs only when the supernal deem it fit or they allow it to happen. Clearly, while there was an intermingling of the two worlds, there also existed a line of demarcation. So concurrently, and I'll just sort of sum up now, concurrently, I would like to draw your attention to two aspects of the denouement. Firstly, the mother who has been castigated for being a deviant woman and has been appropriately punished with death appears to have re-established her hierarchical control over her sons in the end when her words come to a fulfillment. This effectuates a homiletical reading of the text by emphasizing the social hierarchy, irrespective of gender, should not be dismantled. Secondly, the mention of the maid, the Sikhanu, reveals the social structure of early Paita society, where generational bonded slavery was practiced by village chiefs and extremely wealthy families. Her presence, though in a tale of antiquity, can be used as a literary and cultural evidence to buttress the dearly held belief that Thangou and Liandou did truly exist in the past. Having said this, there is a recent trend of attempting to historicize oral folklore with discoveries of physical sites that claim to correspond with those that are mentioned in our oral cultural relics. Now, until there is empirical evidence that can withstand rigorous inquiry, such linguistic fervor may only question the credibility of our folklore. And this is where I'll bring my presentation to an end. And I want to extend my profound thanks to my audience for having patiently listened for, I think, almost 45 minutes. Yeah. So I'm done. If there is anything, I'll give the time back to the host.
Okay, thank you so much for your interesting and insightful presentation. I have some questions that I want us to discuss. I want, your opinion first, and then if we still have time, we will go to the chat box and let's see if we can discuss those that are posted there. And first of all, you have given an interesting study of the supernatural elements in the tale. Can you please further explain to us how there appears to be a seamless coexistence between the magical supernatural realism and the real world in the text, and what does this reveal of the early Paite society?
Yeah. Am I audible now?
Yes.
Yeah. So see, as I had mentioned at the very beginning of my paper, our folklore and also our belief, the community's belief, the early community's belief in the existence of the supernatural is not being questioned. Rather, what is happening here is that we are trying to understand the nature of our perception of the supernatural. So as I have mentioned in the text, as I have mentioned in my paper, I am not questioning the existence of the magical realm. I am not contesting that. Rather, what I'm trying to say here is that they have a coexistence. And for the tribal mind, because we are so finely attuned to our natural environment, right? Because we are more perceptive to even the smallest of changes in the nature around us. It becomes easy for us to absorb and accept, to use Wordsworth's quote, a willing suspension of disbelief, right? So it is easier for us to follow the principle of not questioning how and why things happen.
Okay.
So, yeah,
yes.
I hope I've answered your question.
Yes, yes. And I would also want your opinion on how far do you think these elements, supernatural elements, whether they are still embedded in a culture today, or we totally do away with them in modern times?
See, for this, yes, there are remnants, vestiges of it still remain. Say, for example, I'll give you an extremely, non-academic example here, or a non-literary example.
Yes.
My son I just pulled out one of the tooth of my son the other day. And as I was taught by my parents, throw it to the thankik, the lizard, and ask for a wish that you replace your good for nothing human tooth for their better, sharper ones. Now, where does this originate from? So these are certain cultural practices, cultural tropes that still remain with us. Perhaps because they do not contest, or perhaps because they do not come in contradiction with an established religion that we now profess, right? So they come under the ambit of what you would call, cultural rituals, cultural beliefs, as opposed to as opposed to religious beliefs. But as you have mentioned in your paper, there is a complete abolition, a complete disappearance of what we practiced originally in the name of our indigenous faith, in the name of our indigenous religion. That has been completely obliterated. That is not visible anymore. None of us practice it anymore. But other supernatural beliefs we still carry on. Like, for example, we do not hand over children or young or infants at the threshold of a house. It is considered to be appropriate. We do not do that. So these rituals, or these behavior that has been ingrained in us, these things which we follow almost unconsciously, is proof that at some point of time there must have occurred some incident which buttressed that claim and has become, the de rigueur, and which is why people follow it till today.
Yes, thank you. And I think it also, especially in the context of the tale, the attributes to the philosophical reality, the fictive reality, the imagination of the narrator, those kind of reality. But let's go to the next question. And, as a woman reader, do you think that the narration of the selected tale gives equal treatment to both the male and the female characters?
No, there is a bias here. And in this case, I should say, if you look at it from a very moral point of view, the bias here is, of course, it leans in favor of the boys, where they are being seen as role model children who struggle despite the odds and have finally made it in life. But if you look at it from the perspective of a critical literary perspective, there is more nuances that has been devoted, that has been allocated in the representation of the women characters here.
Okay.
For example, there's the possibility of a juxtaposition, in characters is absolutely not possible in case of the male figures of the tale. It is made possible in the case of the women characters. You have the mother, you have the old woman, and you have the bride, the wife, and maybe the maid, if you can consider her, because she's, her agency is absolutely not described. And yes, the paternal aunt, the knee, right? So in terms of the number, in terms of enumeration, you have more women characters, and there is also a wider range, of their agency, which helps you understand the social milieu, the social conditions of the time in which they were living in.
Thank you. I think since it's now already 8:13, let me stop with my own question. Let me just pick up one or two questions from the chat box. And, the first one, let's try to answer this. Why magic or supernatural things occupied most of our folklore? Let us answer. Why magic or supernatural things occupied most of our folklore?
See, as I have said in my premise, that the human mind is it's a very creative tool. The human mind is extremely strong in terms of its imaginary power. So there is this belief in folklore theory that at times what the unbelievable, the physically inconceivable events or occurrences that one comes across in folk tales may not necessarily have existed in real life. They can be seen as, you know, a psychological manifestation of the dilemma, the happiness, the you know, the anxiety, the suffering, the pain that the individual is experiencing, which he then you know, projects as occurrences that appear to happen around him. Which is why you will find that the unbelievable becomes believable, the impossible becomes possible in folktales.
Yeah, thank you. And I think with this, we have to request our program manager to take the time, please. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. I would like to take in from here, like we have some questions from the side of the organizers. So yeah, so my question is as from the side of the organizer. Um, as you have mentioned, you know, music plays a significant role, and specifically in some contexts, like as you have mentioned very clearly. So in that context, I would like to ask two questions. Like the first would be, was magic the subject of the traditional Zhou society rather than the object, or is it even both, right? And the second would be this is for the, you know, broader question, like in relation to the local narratives, and how do you connect it to the broader narratives, right? So my question is, if the local narratives are transfers towards the reification of society, that it permits an, say, ontology in which its local narratives, that is folklore, can be taken as a separate unit. Can a multiplicity of society exist in this order, if not in its disorder? Right. So I'm more framing this question in a more, you know, let's say post-structuralist or social theories kind of framework. So in that sense, these are the second question is more inclined to the broader audience, right? Beyond the, let's say, piety or the folklore. So thank you.
Okay, it's about the local, and you know, if we look at our traditional society, it's a village state kind of a society. Now we have nation state, and I don't know if I answered to your question, but during this pandemic, those who are staying here in Churchandpur, the village or the town or wherever, we all are aware of this. There is this huge difference between the difference in the success of the locally imposed lockdown by the local task force, the village level task force, and the government, isn't it? We all know. I was thinking, why is this recurring tendency for us, especially the tribals, on our part to disobey and distrust the government, which has a more systematic system of governance than our traditional customs? When there is this locally enforced lockdowns, it's like 100% success. But with the government, we can't say that it's even 50% success, isn't it? So what I was thinking is, it may be because of, you know, please bear with me, of this, that we have inherited this collective mentality on governance, and that is that village state mentality, you know, the local level. Do I answer your question, or?
Yes, yes. Yeah, I think it's getting to the point. And yeah, I mean, this question is both open to the host and the resource person. Yeah.
Yes.
So
Yeah. Am I audible? Yeah. See, I have a very simple take on this. We talk of deconstruction, we talk of moving away from the center in academia, right? And at a time when everybody is talking, when the thrust and the emphasis is on deconstructing and moving away from the center, and giving prominence to the constituents of what is supposedly a homogenic structure, homogenic entity, homogenic society. These, ruptures of disbelieving certain disbelieving voices, which seem to castigate, or which seem to sort of reprimand these dissenting voices, does not do good for the growth of literature. You cannot enforce a blanket, monolithic, homogeneous structure over a large number of people who have various dialects, who hold certain beliefs as intrinsically theirs and uniquely theirs. Yeah. So I think the point here is that we need to learn to share from the large, as we have in our traditional Christmas feasts, when you have this large plate and you share your meal from that same plate. I think a similar exercise has to be carried out now. When there is an attempt to homogenize, and impose a certain identity, a certain nomenclature, a certain sense of what would dictate your politics, what would dictate your literature, what would dictate your cultural approaches. That is when it becomes problematic, because it is with these several heterogeneous components which go on to make this composite picture that we're attempting to create here. And I was just looking at the chat box, I was reading in the chat box, and there are a lot of these, as you would say, derisive comments about why a particular tribe is being necessarily studied in this in this platform here. Now, that is exactly the kind of attitude of one-upmanship, that is unfortunately being practiced in our contemporary society. And literature, as all of us know, is never written in isolation. It echoes the socio-cultural milieu of its contemporary times. And if our literature today, or what emerges from our indigenous local writings, we need to sort of read into that and listen to what is not being written. We need to learn how to read what is not being written, instead of forcefully imposing a homogenic, monolithic identity that is being, which is why also I ended my paper with this caution that this recent trend of discovering archaeological sites that seem to, that have claims of correspondence to relics that are mentioned in our culture, in our oral tales, we have to slightly go slow on that, because whatever that we are promoting as, or our attempts to historicize our past through our literature, especially the folk tales, can also lead to a simple case of, jingoism, which may not have any longevity. So that is somewhere where we need to be very careful about. I think I have suitably confused you enough. Am I correct?
Yes, I am like very much happy with the answer, because I'm more inclined to the the perspective of a more multiplicities. Sorry, multiplicities. Yeah,
Exactly.
that kind of sense. So
You have to give the space to multiplicities. The whole point now, the whole trend now is to decentralize, move away from a as I said, one monolithic hegemonic identity. We need to break from that now, and you have to give due respect and space to be able to nurture that. If we were at, that's it. I'll stop here.
Thank you so much.
It
And
can get very political. and let's keep that away from this platform.
Yes.
When you conduct a seminar on social sciences and political science and history, feel free to debate. But since we are restraining ourselves to within the ambits of literature, this is where I will stop.
Yes, no problem. So this question is from Son Kim. The question goes, how far do you think the ubiquity of the supernatural or the magic in the old Zhou society plays a part in the conversion of the Zhou masses to Christianity? So this is the question. And this this is another question from Kamlian Sang Naulak, so that you might have the time to think about the question. So I'll continue with the question. So the question is, drawing from Thanghu Liandou's story, it appears that the supernatural is not a passive entity in the traditional Zhou cosmology, but rather actively interceding on behalf of the people, here on behalf of Thanghu Liandou. This despite philanthropy being a highly held principle in Zhou kinship and relations. So why do you think in the story there is a rather emphasis or almost a juxtaposition of a kind of justice from supernatural agency? So there's another question. Will come to that later. Yeah.
Regarding that supernaturalism in any folk tales, not necessarily here, this supernaturalism or the magical thing is often called philosophical reality. There is a higher reality or the fictive reality, and here in this it is the what our resource person, what is it, tang lao nu, something like that, right? And she cooked and kept their house while they were cultivating their jum. And this guardian spirit here is the supernatural agency who represents the fictive reality. And fictive reality is the construct of the narrative imagination. Apparently, this fictive reality is the higher, intangible, and philosophical reality. It is the philosophical reality of the era in that culture, while where the folktale originates. It is also the relation to the relation to the emotional and the real life. I hope you get what I mean. That Pitek, that old woman, in the form of the old woman, and the works she performed for the brothers, they are not just make-believe. Okay, they represent the desire of the narrator, who represents the type to which Liandou and Thanghou belongs. This supernatural agency, it was not just a fantasy, but the innermost desire of the marginalized people of that era. And the fact that this supernatural as an agency provided the orphan brothers with food is reflective of the desire of the people that having enough provision in the form of food is it was one of the most important basic requirement for survival. And this fictive reality, which not only shows the inner reality of the socially marginalized people, it also serves a pivotal role in the narration, giving the tale a complete shape, isn't it? Had the old woman not been present in the tale, Liandou and Thanghou would not have been able to finally be accepted, nor would they have been able to perform the ton at the end, isn't it? Because she's so important in the narration, as well as it served as the philosophical reality. I think that answers both the questions that you have read out.
Yeah. Moving to the next question. How far do you think the ubiquity of the supernatural or magic in the old Zhou society plays a part in the conversion of the Zhou masses to Christianity? This is from Sun Kim. Yeah.
I think this question was brought up by Moy, earlier on, whether we still whether there are remnants of our religious beliefs and cultural practices even today. And I have answered this question earlier on, haven't I? Moy?
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, if you can recall that there was this one question that she had asked, whether these sort of belief in our supernatural, whether they still exist, and yes, it does. But as I had said earlier on, as long as it does not contest or come in conflict with our religious faith, we still do practice certain, do's and don'ts based on the inheritance that has been passed down to us, the oral cultural inheritance that has been passed down to us. And I've given some examples for it also.
Okay. I think that clarifies for the yeah.
There is one here by Lalmun Par about the male gaze and how that has influenced a lot of our literature and folklore, and how do we interpret that in a contemporary society. So I'll just take this here, not particularly with folk tales as far as right now, but yeah, I was working on some Paite proverbs, Paite Pauna, and one thing that has really come across is how the male gaze, as Laka calls it, how the male gaze acts in two ways. Actually, one where it seeks to be a custodian of a woman's virtue, which is why you have so many prescriptive, assertions in your texts, in your folk tales, in your proverbs, which seem to, provide, as I said, a normative behavior for a woman, gives the definition and outlines within what space that a woman can, exert her agency. And simultaneously, there also is this, the same custodian of a woman's virtue is also responsible for putting her in that perilous condition. And all of literature, not necessarily, our Zhou oral literature, all of literature, because we are writing in a patriarchal society, all of the literature has always aimed at educating, at curtailing, at conditioning the woman figure. There are, there is no attempt to understand and, admonish the source of that rupture, which is the male gaze. That is not being controlled or disciplined. And I think that is also reflected in our, as I said, in the proverbs that are there, which talks of, how women are like this, how women are compared to the feces of a hen, how a nagging woman, how an evil woman causes a rift amongst harmonious brothers, etc., etc. So the male gaze has definitely been a very, very, strong and a very powerful tool in determining the nuances, the nature, and the positionality of what was passed down in our oral tradition. So all of it has always been an oral tradition. If you look at it from the perspective of gender, especially for women, it has always been prescriptive. It's always prescriptive, it is always about conditioning, it's always about educating and admonishing the woman. But the reason why in a particular text somebody gets quote unquote raped, or somebody's private parts are displayed or being called out to display, it is because of this male gaze. I hope I've been able to answer this question.
Yeah, we'll take a last question. Like, if Professor Moy, you have something to say.
Okay, the male gauge. The reason There is one very big reason, because we are a patriarchal society. I think that itself answered that question, isn't it?
Okay.
It has to influence, isn't it? Because the thing that runs, the thing that governs a society is patriarchy. So that's it.
I'll just sort of buttress her point here. There is this one proverb, one Paite proverb. I'm afraid I'll not be able to exactly quote it, but the paraphrase basically translates as, parents should control, admonish their daughters, because a spoiled daughter, or a wayward daughter will most likely become an unwed mother. Now, where does this come from? This idea of shaming a woman, the idea of shame is born by a woman and her family. There is no concept or idea of shame in the misdeeds of a man's actions. And this is again, as Laka calls it, it is because of the male gaze. The male gaze operates on this principle that men are the custodians of a woman's sexuality. And simultaneously, here is the problem. They are also the perpetrators, the defilers of the thing that they're supposed to be guarding. And how do they guard? How do they instill this obedience? It is by introducing the concept of shame for a woman, to a woman, and for the family members of the woman. If you notice in our oral literatures, there is very little, evidence that seeks to, admonish a man's actions, however cruel it may be. Which is why it is, it's almost very nonchalantly you will have one line to simply say, and he assaulted her, and he raped her. There appear to be no consequences of his misdeeds. But the woman, if she does become violated, you will find that she will be contemplating suicide, or she will be out of shame, she'll leave her home or leave the village, etc., etc.
Okay. So I'll read this last question for you. This is for the resource person, and Professor Moi also can add to it. So though not directly related to the topic, it is still related to the story being discussed. In the Mizoram University's Journal of Literature and Cultural Studies, Dr. Zotang Chingi Fiangte wrote an article about an absence of transgender and homoerotic themes in Mizo folk tales. The paper gives several information about the concealed story about Twaisiala, being a homosexual who was shunned later in life by his brother because of it. The paper also elaborates on how the colonial's view of homosexuality may have contributed in removing the story of Twaisiala. So is there any other related section of this story in the other version of the other Zhou tribes? Just curious. So this question from Marlova Howwood.
This Twaisiala is Thhanghou in Paite. And in our resource person paper, if you look at it's Tango, Liandou, and Liandou. Thanghou is the one who has the wife and whose wife died at the end, isn't it? So I think it will be difficult for her to go to that, because it is a different version where this writer of the article took her materials from. But I think this is the case of censorship also. There are so many versions of these tales and the other, most all of our folk tales, there are many versions. Like, for example, Penglam. Commonly in Paite, we don't have the brother, isn't it? But in Mar and Mizo, they have Chura and Churbura. And there's this Chura's brother called Nahaya. And in Mar, it's Naa. And while I was doing research in this Penglam tales, I met several people. They all claim that Penglam did not have any brother. But I later, much later, after I finished my dissertation, and I even in my paper, I wrote that Penglam did not have brother in Paite versions. But I met one grandmother, quite old, and when I asked her about these tales, she told me that Penglam did have a brother even in Paite version, and he was called Naa. You know, Na. No, yeah, it's only Na. Like that. Here, Tuai Siala is Thangho, and if you look at this Liandou, Thanghou Liandou also, there are two versions of the ending, isn't it? In one version, they were visiting their in-laws, and when they returned, the Goon was flooding, and the flood took his wife, Tuai Tong. But there is this another version that claims that Thanghou had his wife in his one hand and his concubine in the other. And when he was compelled by the flooding water to lose one, he chose his concubine over his wife and let go of his wife, isn't it? I think that we can attribute those kind of things as the case of censorship. All right, like Dwight and that Tuai Siala as a homosexual person, and those kind of things. We have many obscene tales. I'll just use the term obscene tales, those depict sexuality, you know, and other unbecoming, let's say, inappropriate. You know, those are purposely or deliberately neglected. It seems it may be because of different reason, maybe because of religion, maybe because of our values and principles that we uphold in the society. So actually, we can't say that there is no homosexuality or there is nothing like that in our folk tales, but we can't, you know, those I think we best keep for further studies.
I hope that answers the question. Professor Fung, do you have anything to add to this question? Yeah.
I have nothing to add.
Okay, I think that will be the end of the discussion then. Like, I think there are no more questions. So I'll give it back to the to Eddie, like program manager. Thank you.
Yes. Yeah, hello. Am I audible? So this has been a really wonderful experience and a very informative session. We express our gratitude to our host and resource persons for their valuable information and insights on the tales the folklores we have been discussing. And I only hope we, the participants, gain much from the discussion tonight, I mean. And thank you once again. So now we have come to the end of the program. And I want to remind all of you that, all the participants, that there is a feedback form in the chat box if you see. So you please fill up the feedback form so that we can generate this e-certificate through that. The links will be open for a few hours after the program. Yes, and thank you to all the participants. We never imagined that there will be this much participants. We have over, if I'm not mistaken, over 140 joining us tonight. And this webinar has been successful because of all of you. I hope, yes, and we will be able to have more of such programs in the future as well. Perhaps a series of webinars where we can talk of the many other folklores we have. Yes, anyway, as the saying goes, all good things must come to an end. We have come to the end of this program, and it is time to say our goodbyes now. And once again, thank you, everyone. Good night, and good night, everyone. Thank you. we can leave
Thank you
the
for enabling this program this evening, and all the best wishes to Zoe Academia for its future endeavors. Okay, I will take your leave now. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you
yes.
so much.
If there is anything the organizers would like to add, I'll give just a short time and then we'll end it. Okay, if there is none, we can end the webinar here. Thank you, everyone. Good night. Good night.